I have to admit that I requested the chair because I got in just yesterday, still a little bit jet lagged, and so it's 2 in the morning. I was afraid that I might be the first speaker to actually bore himself to sleep on a stage, but I'll see if I can avoid doing that. So I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon to talk to you about innovative market approaches to decarbonize the hardest-to-abate sectors. So first, a little bit about the Center for Green Market Activation, which is where I'm employed. We are a brand new nonprofit organization. We were founded only in June of 2024, so less than a year. So don't feel bad if you haven't heard of us. But the folks that work there, there's about 18 or 19 of us now. Many of us had been involved in similar issues in prior roles at other organizations working on these kinds of market-based approaches. And our mission at GMA is really to develop these market-based systems and then use them to aggregate demand from corporate leaders for low-carbon goods and services, and to send a larger demand signal to help scale climate progress in hard-to-abate sectors. And when we talk about hard-to-abate sectors, we're really referring to heavy transport and heavy industry. And the reason why we do this is that we see a variety of really important barriers standing in the way of technology adoption in these sectors. I think many of you are no stranger to the challenges and difficulties in making progress in these sectors. I think climate progress is difficult as a whole, but it's even harder in these sectors. There's a reason why they're called hard to abate. And what we see, of course, is that in these sectors, the solutions, they do exist, but they are limited in availability. They're only available in certain locations, and of course, they are quite expensive. On the supply side, we also suffer from this classic chicken or egg problem where producers that do have new technologies that have been demonstrated at a demonstration scale are eager to scale those up, but are unable to do so confidently in the absence of a clear demand signal from the buyers. Or to be a little bit more precise, they're unable to get the financing they need without committed offtake agreements in place. And lastly, even for those buyers that actually are motivated and willing to pay the premium, and there are those out there that have set ambitious climate targets, many of these companies lack the expertise to really know what to purchase. And so they need help and a way of making strategic purchasing decisions for these new technologies that are just entering the market. And so that's where our work becomes relevant. We have basically two things that we do which are complementary to one another. So first, we design and build market-based systems, and specifically book and claim systems. I'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later in my presentation, but through book and claim systems, what you're doing is you're separating the environmental attributes, things like CO2 reductions, from the physical product. And when you do that, you introduce a lot more flexibility into the market, and you open up opportunities for customers to make purchases and make investments that they otherwise would not have been able to do so. And then on top of that, once those systems are built, we then aggregate demand for those attributes. So instead of coordinating or negotiating individual bilateral agreements, we're working with a large group of committed buyers that are able to send a much greater demand signal to the market, which gives more confidence to producers to go ahead and scale up. We have already had success with this model in a few different areas. So I'll just note our work in aviation through the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance. That's our most mature program, and we have been able to aggregate demand for about $400 million worth of sustainable aviation fuel certificates on behalf of about 40 corporate customers. A newer program that we launched just recently on heavy-duty trucking, here we're really focused on the heaviest of the trucks, so the Class 8 big rig vehicles that you see on the highway. We're using the same book and claim model, same demand aggregation, and our ambition here is to deploy 450 or more electric vehicle trucks on the road over the next few years. We just got our responses back to our first RFP, and we're optimistic that we might actually be able to exceed that target, working on behalf of about 10 corporate customers. And then we're also active in the maritime space with our friends from the Aspen Institute through the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance. And here they launched and executed a tender last year, which will drive about 80,000 tons of avoided CO2 emissions in the maritime sector over about a 2-year period. And this was done on behalf of about 40 members. They are now in the midst of running a second tender, and this is focused specifically on e-fuels. So they are now climbing up the curve in terms of their ambition on technology. We are expecting to get results from that tender this summer and announcements to follow shortly thereafter. So when you look at these three programs, there's a couple common themes for all three. So number one, we do all of these in partnership with other NGOs. So in the case of SABA, for example, that's a program that we run with EDF and RMI, which are two US-based but global nonprofit organizations. For heavy-duty trucking, we work very closely with the Smart Freight Center, and then ZEMBA, as I mentioned, we work with the Aspen Institute. And then the other common theme here, and this is really kind of critical for the book and claim system, is that when we think about the customers or the source of the investment, it's not the airlines or the carriers in the case of trucking or the maritime sector. It's really the corporate customers, those that fly on the planes or those that are contracting with the carriers to move their goods. And I'll show you an example of what those kind of companies are when we talk a little bit more specifically about SABA. So let me do a little bit more of a deep dive to show how this model works specifically for aviation. So SABA is something that got off the ground around 2021 in partnership with a couple of other NGOs. And when you look at the membership today, we've got something like 40. I don't remember the exact number because we add one or two companies pretty much every month. But we have heavy representation from global consultancies, financial services firms, big tech, and also a growing number of pharmaceutical firms who are shipping a lot of goods through air freight. A common characteristic across these companies, of course, there's two things. One, they've set ambitious climate targets, and then secondly, they fly a lot. They are not large emitters in absolute terms for the most part, but their carbon emissions footprint is heavily dominated by their aviation emissions. And so if they want to meet their climate targets, they need to find a way to get those emissions under control. And sustainable aviation fuel certificates is one of the few pathways available to them other than simply flying less, which is actually something that many of them have done. But SAF certificates gives them an opportunity to meet their targets that they otherwise would have really struggled to meet. So if we talk a little bit about the book and claim model that we're using for sustainable aviation fuel, it's really following the approach that was laid out by the renewable energy certificates market. So again, what you're doing here is you're separating the attribute from the physical product. In the case of SAF, you start with a barrel or a liter or a gallon of sustainable aviation fuel. It gets blended with conventional kerosene, and it's at that point of blending, at least in our model of the system, where the decoupling occurs. The attribute is then sold, and here again we're talking about the CO2 reductions. The attribute are sold to a corporate customer who receives a claim, a certificate that they can use to count towards their Scope 3 emissions reduction goals. At the same time, the physical fuel travels along the physical value chain. It goes to an airport, it's bought by an airline, it's combusted in an airplane, and the airline is able to take a Scope 1 reduction claim. So in this model, it's really a win-win. The corporate customer who is paying all or most of the premium is able to make a claim against the Scope 3 targets. The airline is able to make a Scope 1 claim, and what we get is increased capital and increased investment into the sustainable aviation fuel market, because absent this book and claim system, that corporate source of revenue would have been greatly restricted, if not totally impossible. We have now deployed this model through our joint procurements going back the last few years. And our trajectory sort of follows the SAF market as a whole. There's been tremendous growth in SAF production. I think the latest numbers are that there's been 100% growth year over year between 2024 and expected through today. But we do have to acknowledge that this is off a very, very small base. I think we're still in the world of about 0.6% of all jet fuel across the globe is sustainable aviation fuel. So we still have a long ways to go. Similarly, our efforts started quite small. In 2021, we ran a pilot procurement on behalf of about 7 participants, and we ended up purchasing a little bit less than 1 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. A few years later, though, we followed up with a much larger effort on behalf of 25 participants, and we were able to purchase on the order of about 50 million gallons that are now under contract. And one of the exciting things about this, in addition to those greater volumes, is that we were able to see longer offtake periods. When we did the proof of concept, it was really just a single-year deal, but in the most recent procurement, we were actually able to get our corporate customers to agree to 5-year offtake agreements. That's really significant because if you talk to the SAF producers, they need those multi-year offtake commitments in order to get the confidence they need to scale. I will note that in 2023, when we ran that procurement, we were actually only able to purchase in the end, or contract for, about half of the total SAF certificate demand that our members had expressed to us, because there was just a scarcity still in the market. There wasn't enough fuel available that met our needs that we were able to pursue. So that then takes us to the present day. And we are now developing 2 new procurement streams, and I'm excited to be here talking about them because they are going to be launched imminently. And these 2 streams are actually attacking 2 different issues in the market. So procurement stream 1, which we've since renamed SAF-C Connect, this is actually a little bit different than the traditional RFPs that we've run in the past. Here what we're doing is we're creating more of a flexible marketplace or a flexible database. The problem that we're trying to solve here is that the SAF market is very dynamic on both the supply and the demand side. And our RFPs were, while effective, they were not dynamic and they were not super efficient. It would take us 18 to 24 months to run. And that was a bit of a challenge because there's new production coming online all the time, and some SAF producers would come to us after our RFP had closed and say, hey, I've got SAF to sell now, can you help us sell it? And unfortunately, we had to tell them, no, you'll have to wait for our next RFP. With the SAF-C Connect, now they can provide us with offers on an ongoing basis. We screen those for eligibility against our sustainability criteria. For those offers that we accept, they go into our database, which our SABA customers have the ability to access. And again, those customers can access the database on an ongoing basis, and they are able to make purchasing decisions on a schedule that meets their needs. And oftentimes that's driven by the specifics of their greenhouse gas reduction targets or their budget cycles. They then carry on bilateral discussions with the provider directly in order to close on the deal. This procurement stream is really focused on commercially available fuel, so we expect it to be dominated by the HEFA pathway with feedstocks like used cooking oil and animal tallow. For the second procurement stream, we are trying to look ahead, and we're trying to drive greater technology change. We are here, in this case, focused on next generation fuels, so things like e-fuels or power to liquids, or advanced biofuels, things that are made from agricultural and forestry residues or municipal solid waste. The reason why we think this is important, while the HEFA pathway offers tremendous advantages over conventional jet fuel, there are, I think, serious and legitimate concerns about the scalability of the feedstocks that are used to produce those fuels. 2030, around then, is when we start to think that we might rub up against the limits of the availability of those feedstocks, which then can cause problems, environmental problems elsewhere. So we think we need to make targeted and strategic investments now in next generation fuels, and that's really the purpose of this second procurement track. We will be launching that any day now, and our goal is to aggregate enough demand amongst our corporate members to help 1 or more advanced production facilities get to final investment decision with a target commercial operation date of 2030 or earlier. So it's a big lift. One of the challenges here, of course, is that these fuels are a lot more expensive than conventional SAF, which itself is a lot more expensive than conventional jet fuel. So we are asking the corporate customers to pay a premium on top of a premium, but our research and our interaction shows that there's at least a significant number of them that are probably willing to do so, but we will be testing that concept over the coming months. So when we look to this region, and I have to admit that I'm far from an expert in the Asia-Pacific region, but we do believe that the book and claim system and the demand aggregation model are globally applicable. There's no reason why these types of systems or approaches can't work in other parts of the world. In fact, book and claim, one of the great advantages of it is that it crosses geographic boundaries, and you're able to purchase attributes from low-cost production regions. And so we're very excited to see if this model can be deployed effectively in the Asia-Pacific region. For example, just yesterday I participated in the launch of the Green Fuel Forward Initiative, which is a new effort from the World Economic Forum and Gen Zero to try to help grow SAF supply in APAC, and we're very eager to see how SABA might be able to support that initiative and other related efforts. So with that, I think that I will now close my presentation and see if there are any questions that I can help answer.
Hi, thank you for sharing. I was just wondering, how is this, how are these initiatives different from, let's say, the WEF First Movers Coalition, and how do we concentrate efforts?
Yeah. Very good question. And so I think the major, two things. So one, where the similarities are definitely that we are trying to aggregate demand and work with a core set of very committed buyers. And FMC is not the only one. There are other organizations that are doing that in other sectors. I think probably the key difference is that FMC aggregates demand, but then they stop there. One of the key differentiators of GMA is that in addition to aggregating the demand, we actually go out and we run RFPs, and then we support companies through the contracting process. So we help them select the attributes to purchase. I think the other, there's some other, and they recognize this. I mean, we've talked to FMC and we've discussed ways of maybe SABA being an implementation partner for the aviation commitment that the companies have made. We are also a little bit more permissive on the fuel type. So FMC has an 85% carbon intensity threshold for the commitment that their buyers make, whereas SABA has a 60% carbon intensity reduction threshold, which is already pretty ambitious. But FMC is really more about, if you go back to those procurement streams I was talking about, FMC falls more under procurement stream 2. That level of ambition in terms of moving technology forward is more consistent with what FMC is doing, and we're very eager. In fact, for that procurement stream, we are actually looking at an 85% carbon intensity threshold because a lot of our SABA members are also participants in the First Movers Coalition, and we'd like them to be able to utilize SABA to also meet their FMC commitment. So there are clear similarities. We are working closely with them, but one of the most important differentiating factors is that we're taking the next step to actually help drive the procurement process forward all the way through contracting.